But next we've got Jonathan King to talk a little bit about biomedical research.
It hasn't been easy to understand how in one of the richest and scientifically advanced countries on earth, we were totally unprepared to deal with the coronavirus pandemic. Part of the answer lies in the absence of a coherent national health system, right? We spend hundreds of billions of dollars on Medicare, Medicaid, private health insurance, hospital budgets, but those funds and those programs go for people who are already sick and already ill. And they don't do anything to advance diagnosis, prevention, understanding the mechanism of the disease, the origin of it, etiological agents, developing vaccines, therapies. All of those depend on biomedical research, which in the United States, as I said, is not financed by any of the big health insurance programs, but it's financed by the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation, whose budgets are voted each year as part of the Congressional Discretionary budget. And these agencies distribute our tax dollars to investigators in colleges and universities and in medical schools across the nation. And in those institutions, primarily younger and lower paid graduate students and postdocs and technicians labor long hours 24/7 to try to unveil the actual roots of disease. And it's these programs that are responsible for figuring out how to prevent and treat heart disease, stroke, cancer, arthritis, diabetes, Alzheimer's disease, infectious diseases like flu and coronavirus. Now, it was because of the decades of public investment in basic biomedical research that we know the structure of the coronavirus and we know about the spike protein. And the Chinese scientists were able to very quickly determine the nucleotide sequence of the RNA. And it was all those investments that led to the situation where very quickly we now have significant vaccines. And of course, direct federal subsidy for the vaccine makers, but that would have been worth nothing if we hadn't had the basic knowledge about coronavirus and the coronavirus sequence. Nonetheless, those programs had been underfunded for decades. For example, the first coronavirus outbreak, 2003 SARS-CoV-1 outbreak in Asia, that killed thousands of people. It was very well understood. And we could have launched on a program of developing vaccines for it. But those programs were explicitly cut by the US administration. And as a result, when COVID-2 appeared, we weren't ready for it. So that was the outcome of failure to invest in understanding health and disease. Now, sadly, it's the poorest and lowest wealth among us who are hit hardest by these ailments and who are unable to afford, the extra care and full-time care that might alleviate things. Now, here is one of Lindsay's excellent slides. This year was 2017. It was 668 billion for the military. The NIH budgets and the NSF budgets are so small, they're not even broken out in the pie chart. The NIH is buried in Health and Human Services, NSF in Commerce. The NIH that year was about 4% of the budget. So that's the research dealing with all the ills that afflict our population: cancer, stroke, arthritis, diabetes, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, antibiotic-resistant infections, right? 4% of the budget. Well, with the onset of the pandemic and the loss of life from the pandemic, more than 500,000 Americans, Congress finally recognized the need to beef up biomedical research. The CARES Act, passed last summer, directed about $1 billion to the NIH, $4.5 billion to the Centers for Disease Control, $3.5 billion to what's called the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, that has to do with manufacturing vaccines. Well, this aid, it was a step forward responding to the coronavirus after years of inadequate budgets. But a month later, after voting a few billion for the response to the coronavirus, they voted $738 billion for the Pentagon, as Lindsay has showed you, 800 military bases around the world, dangerous new nuclear weapons, and half of which went to large corporations, a few of whom I list here. They are the ones who are eating up our income taxes, and they are the ones who are really financing the claim that, oh, China is a threat, North Korea is a threat, Iran's a threat, Russia's a threat. They don't care whether there's actually a threat. They need a justification for continuing to have the government send them billions of our tax dollars. The profits are guaranteed. It's monopoly contracts because you can't outsource to the Chinese. And so they fiercely protect these contracts because they could never compete in the civilian market. So we have the military industrial complex that Eisenhower so many years ago said was a threat to American democracy. Now, I just want to, just as one concrete examples, if individual Ohio-class submarine were its own country, it would be the sixth most heavily armed nuclear weapons nation. The U.S. has 14 Ohio-class subs. Each of them, can fire off more than, some can fire off as many as 24 missiles, and then each missile has a set of independently targeted warheads. So one submarine firing their missiles can obliterate all the major cities of any country on earth, China, India, Russia, etc. And it might happen by accident, in which case we are all done. You'd think that 14 of these submarines would be enough. No, the administration is proposing to buy a dozen more at about $8 billion each. Well, if instead of buying 12, we only bought 6, we could double the budget of the NIH. Now, everybody here knows that the fiercest megaton ICBM, or a nuclear submarine, is totally helpless against the coronavirus. We are not being attacked by Russians. We're not being attacked by Iranians. We're not being attacked by the Chinese. We're being attacked by the coronavirus, right? And what we need to do is shift these funds. Now, the current bill, it's good. It's good. Gives a few billion more to the NIH, and an additional 5 or 6 billion for kind of an additional agency on the healthcare front. But it's still peanuts compared to, for example, Alzheimer's. 3 million Americans suffer every year from Alzheimer's. Costs Medicaid $250 billion. That's the actual cost of the economy. And the NIH spends about $1 billion a year. A problem that's costing us $250 billion and enormous human suffering. The research budget just for Alzheimer ought to be $25 billion, not 1 or 2 or 3 billion. Now, I just want to close. One of the things I think we need to change things is, I go around and give talks about this stuff. And when I show Lindsay's slide and I say more than half our income taxes go to the military, people say, "Oh, I don't believe that. That can't be true." I'm a professor of political science. I never heard that. And people do not know. They don't know that half their income taxes the checks they write to the government go to weapons. And they tend not to believe it when they hear it. And the reason is, in all the 100 years that the United States government has collected income taxes, no agency of the government has ever reported back to the taxpayers how those dollars are spent. You got to find Lindsay and the National Priorities Project to find that information. It is not, it's buried deep in federal government files. So one little step that we're taking here in Massachusetts, we have a bill which we filed it 2 years ago, filing it again this year, called Taxpayers Right to Know. And it simply says that the state it's legislation that instructs the state administration to report to taxpayers how the state government and the US Congress spent their tax dollars in the prior year. Nothing radical. In Cambridge, twice a year, we get a report from the city manager. How are our property taxes spent? How much to fire? How much to police? How much to schools? Now, there's a lot of political resistance to this because the Northrop Grummans of the world know that if people knew how much of their tax dollars was going to pay the CEOs of Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin, there'd be a fight back. So this is something you can do in your state. We hope to promote it in other states. At that, thanks a lot. Sorry if I went. Well, obviously, there are, we've heard about the Thrive budget. The Poor People's Campaign has a moral budget. We may hear about it from Shiley. And the Congressional Progressive Caucus has a people's agenda that's also very good. And the stimulus proposal has a lot of good stuff. So thanks for giving me the time.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Jonathan.